Good morning. Today is February 18th, 2014. My name is Bruce Moore. I'll be narrating this video and Al Grimaldi will be doing the photography. I would also like to thank my brother Scott and another milk bottle collector for their assistance. Years ago, East Longmeadow was a thriving farming community, as well as being famous for its world-class brownstone. Today's program will concentrate on the dairy farms located here. Many of the local residents had a cow or two for their personal use. Depending on your land size or choice of occupation, some farmers bought several cows or had large herds. There were dairy farms like the White Oak Farm on Maple Street, owned by Edward Burt in 1928, who did not bottle their milk but sold it to milk dealers. His land is where the East Longmeadow High School is now located. Only a select few were able to have their milk processed, bottled, and sold. Our first featured dairy is Broadacre Stock Farm. In 1917, George A. Clark purchased a 45-acre farm from R.P. Richards for $4,500. This farm was located on West Chestnut Street, now known as Chestnut Street. He had a milk house in operation by 1919. In 1921, George and his brother Ray were also breeders of purebred Holstein cattle. Around 1923, George and Ray started a milk route which was mostly operated by Ray till 1946 when he became the sole owner. Their dairy herd was all Guernsey cows during operations. During the early years, all milk was sold in its raw form, straight from the cow. Later, the milk was pasteurized, but you could still buy raw milk at the farm. They also worked the 115-acre Old Chapman Farm on the corner of Shaker Road and Chestnut Street, at which George and his wife resided. Our first three bottles are from the Broadacre Stock Farm, run by George A. Clark. On the left is a quarter gill, which is 4 ounces, or a gill, as some people say. It's a British unit of liquid measure, and heavy cream would have been in that bottle. The middle bottle is a half pint, and the bottle on the far right is a quart. This is a beautiful 2-gallon metal milk can from the Broadacre Stock Farm, which George Clark owned. His name is embossed on the can in copper. These are a couple of large milk containers. They're 40 quart or 10 gallons. The one on the left doesn't have a cover, and the one on the right has the cover that would be on there to keep the raw milk from spoiling. Ray Clark, who was born in 1894, ran the entire operation from 1946 until September 1958. In 1952, the property on Chestnut Street, where Ray and his family resided, was sold to the American Saw Company. Later, American Saw was sold to Lennox Tool Company. Ray made a brick house on Hamden Road, now owned by Sandro, who owns Mex Landscaping Service. There is a huge garage door located under the house where Ray kept his large milk truck and equipment. After 1952, all milk was purchased, processed, and bottled at Forest Park Dairy on Shaker Road, which was owned by Albert Dietrich. Ray delivered between 500 and 600 quarts of milk daily. He continued operations until the day before his death in 1958. This bottle is from Ray L. Clark. It's a Pyro bottle from 1956. It's a square quart. He also had embossed quarts from the 1940s, which you'll see in the photo of him that was previously shown. Up next is Walter C. Benedict and Son. Walter owned and operated the large dairy farm at the corner of Shaker Road and Chestnut Street. He had purchased the 115-acre farm from George Clark. In 1942, he sold 40 acres of the farm's meadowlands to Pratt & Whitney Aircraft Corporation for $20,000. Pratt & Whitney built their plant there, which later became Package Machine Company. Milk was peddled by his son Arthur, mostly in Springfield, and he delivered around 500 quarts per day. These are two bottles from W.C. Benedict and Son. The bottle on the left is an older embossed bottle, and the bottle on the right is the later one that's called a pyro. And on the back, you'll see a nice drawing of a milkman in his milk truck, and it says W.C. Benedict and Son on the truck. After Mr. Benedict retired, Abraham Krieger bought the remaining 30 acres for $6,500. He began a dairy known as Abraham L. Krieger and Sons Dairy Farm. They had 135 cows. After the father's death, it was known as Kriegers Brothers Dairy. They farmed and continued milk production until 1972. It is assumed that they sold their milk to Forest Park Dairy, which was located nearby on Shaker Road. There is no evidence that they bottled their own milk. Featured next is Clover Lawn Farm. In 1861, Samuel H. Ellis purchased a farm on Shaker Road. Some of this 200-acre farm was bought from the Enfield Shakers. His first registered shorthorn cow was bought in 1873. He built up a herd of shorthorn purebreds. The house burned in 1912, and the family moved to Brook Street. This farm was situated where the entrance to the East Longmeadow Industrial Park is located on Shaker Road. Major Frederick Drinkwater then bought the farm. Henry A. Dietrich lived on the farm and was a milk dealer in 1928. His sister had married Mr. Drinkwater. A 1936 newspaper ad shows that he was joined by his brother Albert. They were selling bottles of Clover Lawn milk to Springfield and the vicinity. All of the milk produced was from the Guernsey cows. In 1937, Albert took over the Clover Lawn farm business. These bottles were all embossed. In 1944, he made a change to a black pyro bottle. They are very scarce and highly collectible. These are two bottles from Clover Lawn Farm. The one on the left from the 1930s is a pint, and the bottle on the right is the 1944 bottle, the tribute bottle that Albert Dietrich did of the Clover Lawn Farm. And this is the back. Later, Albert Dietrich changed the name of the business to Forest Park Dairy. He bought, pasteurized, and bottled milk from local dairies. His fleet of trucks delivered milk to many towns and schools. During 1960, he supplied milk to all the schools in East Longmeadow. The price of a half pint was 5 cents. His dairy was still in business until after 1964. Albert sold his 200-acre farm in the late 1960s for $600,000 to the Industrial Committee. John C. Auto Printing Company bought the house and barn on what is now the left corner of Industrial Drive off Shaker Road. Albert died in May 1983 at age 90. These are bottles from Forest Park Dairy. On the left is a quart, and then a pint bottle, and then a quarter gill for cream. a Pyro quart bottle, and then a little half-pint bottle from 1954. That's the bottles that would have been sold for a nickel in the schools. Up next is W.H. Allen & Sons. W.H. Allen & Sons Milk Company was founded by William H. Allen II. He was born in 1907 and died in 1984. He worked at the dairy with his two sons, William III and Herbert H. Allen. The bottle pictured is a Pyro-lettered quart from 1939. This dairy was shown as still being in operation in 1945. Where this dairy was located and who bottled the milk is still a mystery. It could be assumed that the milk was bottled at the Forest Park Dairy owned by Albert Dietrich and located on Shaker Road. These bottles are scarce and highly collectible. Here is a Pyro quart bottle from 1939 from W.H. Allen & Son. Very scarce bottle. Next is Emil Hahn & Sons. In 1949, when Mr. Hahn moved his milk business from Chicopee to East Longmeadow, he bought the old Dwight farm on Summers Road. During the 1950s, the road he lived on was changed to Meadowbrook Road. At that time, Summers Road was straightened out and reconfigured. The Dwight farm was started in the mid-1700s. Today, this farm is operated by John Burney and known as Meadowbrook Farm. Mr. Hahn and his sons Emil Jr. and Everett G. had some cows on the property. He brought his milk to Albert Dietrich on Shaker Road for pasteurization and bottling. They delivered quarts of milk from his trucks to local residents. Emil died in 1988 at the age of 89. This Pyro quart bottle is Emil C. Hahn & Sons, and it's called a Space Saver bottle because the neck is much skinnier up top here. It's supposed to save space in the case. This is the back. Farm Crest Dairy is next. This is a newly discovered dairy. Help from my brother Scott shed more light on the dairy. On June 10, 1933, Boston granted charters and 500 shares to Ben R. Center of Greenfield and Harold B. Messenger of East Longmeadow for Farm Crest Dairy Incorporated. Mr. Messenger lived on Ash Street off Dewey Avenue near Four Corners. He is still listed in 1935 as owning the business. It could be presumed that milk was bought and processed at Forest Park Dairy by Mr. Dietrich. A bottle from this dairy exists, but unfortunately, we were unable to acquire it for this presentation. Next is Fenway Farm Dairy. This property is located at the corner of Allen Street and Porter Road. A 75-acre farm was purchased in 1931 by George E. Fisk and his son Olin M. Fisk from the heirs of Mary Phillips, who used to have an old sawmill there. By the mid-1930s, the Fisks had built barns and bought cows. They had 70 Jersey cows, which have the highest butter fat and protein of any cow. The business was named Fenway after a road that was planned to be built as an extension of South Branch Parkway. This new road was to be called Fenway, which would have approximately followed the north branch of the Mill River, a portion of which runs through the property. The term fen means swampy land. Fenway Farm Dairy stayed in operation until after World War II, at which time it was sold to H.P. Hood Company. The Fisk family had already started a golf driving range in the late 1930s on part of the property. After 1940, the pitch and putt course opened and today is still in operation with the Pine Knoll Par 3 course, batting cages, miniature golf, and a snack bar. Currently, the fourth generation of the Fisk family runs the entire operation. These are 3 quart bottles from Fenway Farm Dairy. The middle one is got a fluted design on the bottle, and on the back you'll notice that it's a store bottle that you can buy. I believe that's a 5-cent deposit on the bottle. And this last one, there's only 2 known. It's a 2-color pyro, orange and black, of the Fenway Farm Dairy. It was incorporated at this point, and on the back, wonderful photo of the actual farm. Beautiful bottles. This one is really, really hard to find. They all are very hard to find because they don't say East Longmeadow on the other ones. This 2-color pyro bottle is from 1944, one of the last bottles they made. Our last 3 dairy farms were all located on Hall Hill Road, named after the Hall family. Today the street is known as Prospect Street, which means an extensive view. Wachusett Farm. Harry G. Fisk, owner of Fisk Tire Company, had a huge gentleman's farm on Prospect Street. His initial purchase in 1919 was the Christensen family's 75-acre farm for $7,500. The Christensen home was then moved to the corner of Prospect and Pease Road, where it is still located. Included in the sale was the large field where the Greek Orthodox Church is located. Mr. Fisk purchased a total of 6 farms and owned 250 acres of land. In 1920, he built the first mansion in East Longmeadow, located at 440 Prospect Street. In June 1940, Richard and Helen Harper purchased the estate. They owned the property until 1949, when Helen Bradford purchased it. She was president of West Springfield Wire and Tinsel Company. She bought the house and 250 acres for $85,000. When Mr. Fisk ran the farm, there were 4,000 peach trees, 200 apple trees, 4 farmers' cottages, a large stock barn for his cows, a dairy barn, an ice house, a tiled silo, a piggery, tool house, tennis court, machine sheds, and a hen house with a capacity for 4,500 hens. You can still see some of the apple trees on properties on either side of Prospect Street, all the way to Pease Road. During construction of the house, Mr. Fisk consulted with local historian Harry Andrew Wright about naming his property. Mr. Wright sent a letter telling Mr. Fisk that his farm was located on an old Indian trail known as the Pequot Path, which was situated on land known as Wachusett. Freely translated, Wachusett means where the trail goes over the outlook. Since the Fisk property was on the highest elevation in East Longmeadow, this was acceptable to him, so he named his estate Wachusett Farm. Around this time, Hall Hill Road became known as Prospect Street. These are 3 bottles from the Wachusett Farm, run by Harry Fisk. The bottle on the left is a beautiful quart embossed bottle. The middle one, which you can't see the lettering very well, but that's how an embossed bottle would normally look. All these bottles you see, the dark lettering, they've been colored just for the video. This is a really rare 10-ounce bottle that would have had probably orange juice in it at the time. And the bottle on the right is a half-pint bottle, which would have probably had cream in it. This is a series of 5 photos of the auction that they held at the Fisk estate after he sold the property. The first photo shows the large stock barn that has since been torn down, with lots of people standing in front of the barn waiting for the preview to be over to go in and attend the auction. The second photo shows part of the old stock barn on the right side, and the barn on the left side is now the garage of the Ferraro family on the corner of Chestnut Street and Pease Road. The other three photos show some of the old farm equipment that was offered for sale. Next is W.H. Williams and Son. W.H. Williams and Son ran the Moss Rose Dairy Farm. This farm was located on the left side of Prospect Street beyond Billing Hill Cemetery, going south on Prospect. Currently, this property is owned by John and Monica Blasius, who board and train horses. Mr. Williams seems to have bought the old 75-acre Allen farm in 1924. Mr. Williams and his son, Wendell, ran the dairy farm until Mr. Williams' death in 1944. His son then took over operations. The original milk bottles were labeled as W.H. Williams and Son. Later, Mrs. Williams and her three daughters ran the farm and changed the bottles to Moss Rose Farm. These three bottles are from Williams and Son and Moss Rose Farm, one and the same. The quart on the left is from 1952. The middle bottle is a quarter Gilles or Gill, and the bottle on the right is 1952. That's the Moss Rose Farm. These are three milk caps from the Williams and Son Moss Rose Farm. The two on the right are from chocolate milk that they bottled. Those caps are fairly common. Lastly, Winnepowen Farm. This dairy was located on Prospect Street at the Somers, Connecticut line. Southbrook Estates housing development is now located on the majority of this land. Winnepowen is an old Indian name. He was one of the signers of the deed when William Pynchon bought several tracts of land in 1636. I surmise that Harry Wright, the local historian who helped Mr. Fisk name the Wachusett farm, could have had a hand in naming this dairy farm. Using these Indian names pays tribute to the original settlers of our area. Winnepowen Dairy was started by the Hanks brothers, Roy S. Hanks and Chester W. Hanks. They were born in Enfield, Massachusetts around 1915 and lived there until being forced to move in 1928 when Quabbin Reservoir flooded their town and other surrounding towns. Roy purchased a farm in Somers, Connecticut, and Chet bought the farm later named Winnepowen. Chet's home was in Somers, Connecticut, but the milk processing plant and majority of land was in East Longmeadow. They raised Guernsey and Jersey cows. Roy died in 1996 and Chet died in 2003. In 1943, they placed a help wanted ad in the Springfield paper which read, "Strong man wanted to work, 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m., and the pay was $5 per day." Chet did all of the milk delivery while Roy worked the farms. Originally, all of the embossed bottles were labeled Winnepowen Farm. Around 1952, they changed the name on the bottles to Hanks Brothers Winnepowen Farm. Milk was homogenized in a machine manufactured by Packaged Machinery in East Longmeadow. One of Chet's last delivery trucks was bought from Emil Hahn when he retired. Milk licenses were issued until 1974, but at the end, milk was just being sold in bulk by the hundredweight. I have been calling this dairy Winnipowen Farm, but Eugene Hanks, a farm worker who homogenized the milk, told me they called it Winnipowen Farm. Here's a series of bottles from our last dairy, the Winnipowen Farm, or Winnipowen, as it may now be called by everyone. The bottle on the left is a beautiful quart bottle. You don't often see Jersey and Guernsey cows on the same bottle, so that's unusual. The second one is a pint bottle. And the third bottle is a Pyro quart from 1952. And then they switched to the square bottles after that, up till their last years in production. And the last two on the end are half-pint bottles. They're the same size, but they're a little bit different bottles. The lettering is different on this one and on the back. This is, it's whipping cream. That's the only one I've ever seen of those half-pint bottles. These are 5 milk caps and the tops that would go on top of the bottle from the Winnipowen Farm. The one on the left is one of the original ones, just from the Winnipowen Farm. The rest are all after it changed to Hanks Brothers. Winnipowen Farm. This is a milk case generously donated by Mrs. Bilton of the Winnipowen Farm Dairy. You just put your empty quarts in there and they pick them up and give you your new bottles of fresh milk. This would be a milk carrying case that delivery men like George Clark, Ray Clark, and the like would carry into your house. The picture of Ray Clark shows him actually carrying one of these cases into the yard to be delivered to the homeowner. This is a milk case from the Winnipowen Farm on Prospect Street. You'd have 12 bottles per case. They would be stacked on top of each other, and there's 2 different style bottles in this case here. The smaller rim and a larger rim on the top. And the date is 1959 on this particular case. It's stamped Winnipowen right on the wood and on the metal down below. Local lore says there is another milk bottle connected to East Longmeadow. This bottle's label read, Asselton's Brown Swiss Cow. If you have any more information about this dairy or any others, please call me at 525-3072. Thank you very much.